The Griptilian gives the sequel a serious run for the money. I talked about that in the Knives I'd Never Buy video. I might as well address that real quick. You guys, if you saw that video, Knives I'd Never Buy for EDC, you know that I mentioned the 707 sequel and said that I wouldn't buy it because it just doesn't stack up to the Griptilian as far as getting, bang for your buck. I still stand by that, but obviously I bought it. Hey my friends, Late Boy Scout here with my review of the Benchmade 707 sequel, a really nice EDC knife, a very small and light EDC knife, but as we'll find out during the course of this review, it's one that can handle quite a few somewhat hard tasks. And we're going to cover that as we cover all the bases of this knife. So stick around for the duration of the review. We are going to show you some testing of this knife against some of the materials I like to test all my EDC knives against. We are also going to compare it against one other Benchmade knife that is very closely related, a handful of other great EDC knives that just, compete with it very well for your EDC knife dollars, plus also an extra version of the 707 sequel that we have here to display. So lots of stuff to show you in this review, so stick around for the whole thing. First, let's get into, how about we look at the other versions of the knife? How about that? The other versions of the knife basically are encompassed in this other one right here. So we've got a black coated 707 sequel with serrations. What you can get in your 707 is either this plain blade right here that you see. If I can get to focus, you can either get the plain blade or the black blade, and you can get the plain with serrations or the plain edge, and you can get the black with serrations or a plain edge. All right, so those are your four variations of the 707 sequel. This one's all known to me from Blade HQ. And so if you, depending on what you like, what you prefer, in this version I went with the plain blade, the plain edge and the plain blade for a couple of reasons. Probably the biggest reason is I got this one second hand, and that would that's where most of the credit goes for all this wear and tear that the knife has. Picked it up off of eBay, and then this is actually the first knife that I used Benchmade's Life Sharp program for, because it came somewhat dull from the guy I bought it from. But it's a Benchmade. It's good to go. I knew it was going to be tough, so I sent it in for their sort of cleaning as well as their sharpening, their Life Sharp service. That went really well. Came back nice and sharp, and you'll see that in the testing that we're going to do, that I'm going to show you very shortly. So yeah, a lot of the wear and tear, like I said, came from somebody else, but I have put it through a fair amount of EDC use on my own. So don't think that it's just somebody else's knife. I've definitely put some marks on it. Then we can also talk about pretty much what this knife is the sequel to. This knife is the sequel to the Benchmade 710 McHenry & Williams. This is the original Axis folder from Benchmade. The first one that featured that Axis lock. The one you pull back on like so to close it, pull back on to release it if you want to flip it out like so. Thumb studs obviously, so you can just flip it open like so. This one is in D2 steel, but you can tell a pretty close relationship there, right? I can. They feel very closely related. The lines are very similar. The blade shape on this one is a bit different. This one's got somewhat of a recurve to it, no recurve to that. Then a big chunk cut out in the swedge there, and a blade more reminiscent of the mini-griptilian, which we'll show you shortly. Also, this one is all aluminum with G10 inlays right here, whereas this one is all G10. They do both have liners on them. This one is thinner liners, as you can tell, but otherwise really similar knives. So it is the sequel, you could say, to the 710, and that's why they call it the sequel, the 707 sequel. But it does bear that McHenry & Williams signature on it, just like the sequel does. 154 cm steel, if I didn't say that already. Fantastic steel, one of my favorites. Really, really good. Holds an edge for a long time. Also not too difficult to resharpen. Let's get into some other comparisons. I told you we were going to look at a few other knives that were basically in the same category, EDC-wise. The 707 sequel is a great EDC knife. It is kind of high up there in price, around $140 or so, which is kind of a lot for what you're getting. You could argue that anyway. But a lot of people go for it anyway because it's just such a sweet knife. Feels good in hand. It's really light, really small. It's just a sexy blade, and that's what I would say about it too. Before we get into the comparisons, I haven't really given you any specs on this knife. We're almost 5 minutes in. So let's talk about some of the specs on the 707 sequel. We've got a blade length just under 3 inches at about, I got it here at 2.95, basically is the blade length on that. An overall length of 6.75. It is a clip point blade, as I mentioned before. It's a flat ground right here, but that is not full flat ground. It's kind of a flat saber grind with that, what would you call that? Yeah, anyway, got the swedge on the back, so almost bayonet-like, not quite. Aluminum G10, as I mentioned before, color is the black handle. 2.6 ounces on it, so very light. Once again, makes it a great EDC knife. And it does have that axis lock, which you pull back on, like so, to release. You can flick that in just like that. Pretty nice and fast action on it. Deployment is really good. And of course, you can adjust that on the pivot screw right there. Takes a little Torx driver, so real easy to adjust, and so you can get that right where you want it. The lockup on it, side to side, is pretty nice and tight right now. Front to back, just about perfect, as perfect as I can tell. And you know, I've got this sort of torqued down to the point where it has a good side to side lockup, but also flips open fairly quickly. It may not be as quick and loose as some of the other Benchmade folders can be. Again, you got to kind of, with the axis lock, you got to strike a balance between fast and solid. And right now, this is the balance that I want. So, you know, adjust it to your taste. It is, of course, made in the USA, which is pretty standard for the majority of Benchmade knives. You can tell me about some that are not made in the USA that I'm not aware of if you like to. But that is marked right there, USA, on the Benchmade logo. All right, so let's get into some of these other excellent EDC knives that compete very nicely against the sequel. First off, probably the toughest competition is from Benchmade itself, the mini-griptilian. Really close in size, basically the same size. All right, I think better in hand. That is far more molded to your hand than the sequel is. You can see that. The sequel is just kind of a flat slab of aluminum. Not to say it's not sexy, it is. But ergonomics, not quite as much as we have on the griptilian. All right, it's also got a lot better shape in my book for just kind of locking into your hand and feeling good. Also, plenty of jimping up on there. Okay, what does the 707 sequel got? It's got some built into the frame, nothing on the aluminum though. You can see that in the frame, so you can kind of get some of that traction, and some down here as well. It's got that in common with the 700, or the 710, I should say. But I would just say that the griptilian in hand is far better. It's far better as a camping or hiking, you know, and general use EDC knife. The griptilian gives the sequel a serious run for the money. I talked about that in the Knives I'd Never Buy video. I might as well address that real quick. You guys, if you saw that video, Knives I'd Never Buy for EDC, you know that I mentioned the 707 sequel and said that I wouldn't buy it because it just doesn't stack up to the griptilian as far as getting, you know, bang for your buck. I still stand by that, but obviously I bought it. That pretty much comes down to the fact that I spotted it on eBay for an awesome price. So, you know, what it comes down to is, if I say I'm not going to buy it, but then I spot it for an amazing price, I still might buy it. Let's cover a couple other knives. Spyderco Delica 4 FFG, VG10 steel, another one of my favorite steels. Considerably less expensive than the 707 sequel, still less expensive than the griptilian. And yeah, it kind of gives any EDC knife a run for its money as far as value and quality is concerned. Here's a really high value one. There's a Rat Model 2. Just a nice EDC knife. I mean, it's fast and really comfortable in hand. AUS 8 steel, decent steel. I like it. It's not my favorite, but it's pretty darn good. And again, for the money, that's like 30-something bucks or less. An excellent knife for the money. Let's get into a CRKT offering, the Ripple. Yeah, this is another one of my favorites. I really just love this one for aesthetics and cool factor. Yep, it's got that frame lock on it, Ken Onion design, Akuto Plus steel, first production run on this one. Beautiful, beautiful knife with that bronze frame. Really cool. There's all different versions of the ripple there, and you can, that's just the one that I thought was the coolest. But it stacks up pretty well for price. I think it's under 100 or around 100 for this, and that stacks up right on par with the Griptilian, I'd say, or mini-griptilian. Pretty close. The Leak from Kershaw, another one of my favorite EDCs right here. Use it all the time. And what is it? Under 50, maybe 40, 45, something like that for this knife. With 14C28N steel. Excellent steel. Fantastic steel. Love that. So there's some great stiff competition out there. There's a ton more knives I could show you. We're going to keep it kind of simple though. Lots and lots of competition for the 707 sequel, all competing for your EDC knife dollars and really giving the sequel a run for its money. But the sequel does pretty well as well. Now let's get to some of that EDC testing, which we talked about before. So this knife, when I started the tests on it, came straight back from Benchmade with that Life Sharp work done to the edge. So it had a new factory edge restored onto it. So gave it some paper cut tests to test that edge and see how well they did sharpening it. I would say it cut very, very well. I was pretty impressed. So Benchmade, they know how to put a good edge on a knife when they want to. A lot of times they come not as sharp as I prefer, but they're very, very usable edges. And against that paper, again, very, very slick. Slid through it real quick. Showed its colors just great. Moved on to some cardboard. And I would say that slicing through that sheet of cardboard that I was testing it on, you got to kind of choke up on the knife in certain ways or hold on to the knife to try to slip through that in a way to try to be effective. And with the small handle that this knife has, it's difficult to do that really effectively. I did my best, but got through the cardboard just fine, obviously. Kind of slowed down there towards the end, getting a little hot on the blade, and maybe some of the glue from the cardboard transferring to the blade, slowing it down. But one of the things I noticed the most was just, that little peg of a handle. It was a little difficult to hold on to for that kind of task. Maybe it was just the fact that I was trying to maneuver it quite a bit and move it around in my hand a lot. Again, working on the cardboard, I noticed the small handle more so than the next material I moved on to, which was a little bit of wood. Moved on to some 1x2 pine, carved away at that for a little bit, just kind of shaved one side of it, shaved the next side of it to make basically a stake that I could drive into the ground. And working on that, it pried away at the wood and it cut through it really deeply and really nicely. And for some reason, I didn't really notice how small the handle was doing that work. Maybe it didn't last as long, and so I didn't notice, but it may also just be that, having to not shift my hand around so much, I just didn't notice. Whatever the fact was, depending on the type of work you're doing, you may really notice and be bothered by how small that handle is, and other types of work you won't notice so much. So it's just kind of something to bear in mind as you shop around for your 707 sequel and as you decide whether this is an EDC knife that you want to put in your collection or make, sort of the one standard really good EDC knife that you carry around all the time. It's definitely got potential for that. It's a high quality blade. Benchmade does great work. It's an access lock. It's got 154 cm steel, which is excellent. That Life Sharp guarantee or service that Benchmade offers is really great. The aluminum, the G10, the pocket clip, which I didn't talk about, rides left or right and does really great. A lot of great things I can say about the 707 sequel, and it is a great EDC knife. I like it quite a lot. I'm glad I have it in my collection. I would still say, though, that it doesn't quite live up to, yeah, you guessed it, Benchmade mini-griptilian. And if I were to recommend one of these over the other, it's pretty obvious. It would be the Griptilian. Well, guys, that is my review of the 707 sequel from Benchmade. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful to you. I'm the Late Boy Scout. See you later. Check that out. G10 and aluminum. Real nice. So this is an upgraded version of it, and the steel is actually upgraded as well.